tired of knowing what you should be doing, but not doing it. And the hardest part, it's not that you don't have potential, it's that you can feel it sitting inside you, unused, that quiet frustration, that voice that whispers late at night. You're capable of more, but every morning something pulls you back. Distractions, comfort, old habits that feel stronger than your future, and slowly, without realizing it, you start to doubt yourself. Not your dreams, yourself. But here's the truth most people never hear clearly enough. You are not lacking motivation. You are lacking structure. You are not broken. You are untrained. And in this audiobook, The Discipline Blueprint, Become Unstoppable. You're going to rebuild that structure from the ground up, because discipline is not punishment. Discipline is power. In this audiobook, you will discover how to take control of your mind, your time, your actions, and ultimately, your identity. You will learn how to act when you don't feel like it, how to stay consistent when motivation disappears, how to silence internal chaos and build clarity, how to create habits that don't rely on willpower, how to become someone who follows through, no matter what, and most importantly, how to become unstoppable, not because life gets easier, but because you get stronger. Here's a line I want you to remember. Your life does not change when you feel better. It changes when you act better. This is not entertainment. This is not empty hype. This is a blueprint, and like any blueprint, it only works if you build. If this message already hit something inside you, make a quiet agreement with yourself right now. No announcements, no pressure, just a decision. I'm done living in cycles. And if you're serious about that decision, stay with me, because what you're about to hear next might challenge everything you thought discipline was. And it starts with a truth most people avoid. Chapter 1. Discipline is not what you think. Discipline is not waking up at 5 a.m. It's not cold showers. It's not strict routines or perfect schedules. Those are tools. Discipline is something deeper. Discipline is the ability to act in alignment with your future instead of your feelings in the moment. That's it. Simple to understand, hard to live, because your feelings are loud. They negotiate. They justify. They convince you. Start tomorrow. You deserve a break. You've done enough. And the dangerous part? It sounds reasonable. That's how people stay stuck. Not because they're lazy, but because they're constantly negotiating with themselves. Every day becomes a debate. And discipline loses, not because it's weak, but because it's quiet. Let me show you something. Think about the last time you said you were going to do something important. Work out, study, work on a goal. What happened? At first, there was clarity, energy, a sense of direction. But then a small resistance appeared. You felt tired, distracted, unfocused, and in that moment, you made a decision. Not a big one, a small one. To skip just this once. That's how it starts. Not with failure, with permission. And every time you give yourself that permission, you train your brain. You're not just skipping a task. You're building a pattern that says, my words don't matter. My commitments are flexible. I only act when it's easy. And over time, that becomes your identity. This is why most people struggle, not because they don't know what to do, but because they don't trust themselves to do it. Discipline fixes that, because discipline is not about perfection. It's about non-negotiation. You remove the debate. You remove the emotional vote. You decide once and then you execute. No matter how you feel. Now listen carefully. This is where everything changes. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And if your system depends on motivation, you don't have a system. You have a cycle. That's why this audiobook exists. To break that cycle, to replace randomness with structure, to replace hesitation with action, to replace inconsistency with identity. Because once discipline becomes part of who you are, you don't need to force yourself anymore. You become the kind of person who does what needs to be done, even on bad days, especially on bad days. And that's where power begins. But here's the part most people don't expect. Discipline is not built in the big moments. It's built in the small ones, the quiet decisions, the invisible actions, the moments nobody sees. That's where your future is being shaped right now in ways you're not even paying attention to. So the question is not, can you be disciplined? The real question is, what are you currently training yourself to become? Because whether you realize it or not, you are training something every single day. And in the next chapter, you're going to uncover exactly what that is and how it's either building you or breaking you. Dear friends, we've just started working on this channel, so we'd really appreciate your support. Please like the video and leave a few words in the comments. It'll really help us promote it. We'd be very grateful. Let's keep going. Chapter 2. The Invisible Training. Every action you take trains you, not just physically, not just mentally, but identity-level training. You are not becoming who you want to be. You are becoming who you practice being. And that's a hard truth, because it means your current life is not random. It's trained. Let that sink in. The way you respond to discomfort, trained. The way you handle distractions, trained. The way you delay, hesitate, or follow through, trained. Not by one big decision, but by thousands of small ones. And most of them you didn't even notice. This is what most people misunderstand about discipline. They think it's something you turn on when needed. But discipline doesn't work like that. Discipline is not a switch, it's a pattern built through repetition. Now think about your daily routine. When your alarm goes off, what do? Do you get up immediately or do you negotiate? 5 more minutes. Just one more scroll. I'll start tomorrow. That moment, that tiny, almost invisible moment, that's training. Because your brain is always watching, always learning, always adapting to what you actually do, not what you say you'll do. And if you consistently choose comfort in that moment, you don't just stay in bed. You reinforce a belief. I don't act when it's uncomfortable. That belief spreads. It shows up when you're working, when you're studying, when you're chasing something meaningful. Suddenly, it's not just mornings anymore. It's your entire life. This is why people feel stuck, because they're not just facing resistance, they're facing patterns they've trained over time. But here's the powerful part. If patterns can be built, they can be rebuilt. You are not locked into who you've been. You are conditioned into it. And conditioning can be changed. But it requires awareness, because you can't change what you don't see. So let's make it visible. Right now, I want you to think about one habit you struggle with. Just one. Maybe it's procrastination. Maybe it's inconsistency. Maybe it's distraction. Now ask yourself, what am I actually training every time I repeat this? Not what it feels like, not what you tell yourself. What are you training? Because every time you delay, you train avoidance. Every time you scroll instead of act, you train distraction. Every time you quit early, you train surrender. That's the real cost, not the missed task, the reinforced identity, and identity is powerful. Because once you believe something about yourself, you start acting in alignment with it. I'm not disciplined. I'm not consistent. I always fall off. Those aren't just thoughts. They're conclusions built from repeated evidence. Evidence you created. But here's where everything shifts. If identity is built from evidence, then you can change your identity by changing the evidence. Small actions, repeated consistently. That's how you rewrite who you are. Not through motivation, through proof. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who decides to wake up and immediately get out of bed. No hesitation, no negotiation, just action. Day 1, it's hard. Day 2, still uncomfortable. Day 5, slightly easier. Day 10, it feels normal. What happened? They didn't just build a habit. They built evidence. Evidence that says, I do what I say. I act without delay. I move when it's uncomfortable. And slowly, that becomes identity. Not because they said it, because they proved it. This is the blueprint. Not big changes, consistent ones. Now here's a question that might challenge you. What if the problem is not your lack of discipline, but your consistency in training the wrong habits? Think about that. Because most people are incredibly consistent, just not in the direction they want. Consistent in distraction, consistent in avoidance, consistent in starting and stopping. So the issue is not effort, it's direction. You don't need more energy. You need better alignment. You need to start asking, what am I reinforcing right now? Because every moment is a vote for who you're becoming. And the scary part, you don't get to pause that vote. It's happening whether you're intentional or not. So the real question becomes, are you training yourself to be strong, or are you training yourself to be comfortable? Because those two paths lead to completely different lives. And the difference between them is not talent. It's not luck. It's discipline. Quiet, repetitive, relentless discipline. Now, here's where it gets deeper, because understanding this is one thing, but applying it, that's where most people break. Because awareness doesn't remove resistance, it exposes it. And in the next chapter, you're going to come face to face with the force that quietly destroys discipline, even when you know exactly what to do. The force that feels harmless but shapes your entire future. And once you see it clearly, you won't be able to ignore it anymore. Chapter 3. The Comfort Trap. There is a force in your life that feels safe, familiar, even deserved, and it's quietly destroying your discipline. Comfort. Not obvious comfort, not the kind you notice immediately, but subtle comfort, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. Take it easy. You've done enough. You can start later. And the dangerous part? It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like relief. That's why it wins, because you don't fight it. You agree with it. You cooperate with it. And slowly, without realizing it, you build a life around avoiding discomfort. Now, let's be clear. Comfort is not the enemy, but uncontrolled comfort is, because growth never happens inside it. Every meaningful change in your life requires friction, requires effort, requires moments where you'd rather not, but you do it anyway. That's where discipline lives. But most people, they've trained themselves to escape that moment. the moment where it gets hard, the moment where it gets boring, the moment where it gets uncomfortable. And they escape through distraction, phones, social media, endless scrolling, constant noise, not because they're weak, but because it's easy. And easy is addictive. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in silence with no distractions and just focused? No phone, no music, no notifications, just you and the task. For most people, that's uncomfortable, almost unbearable. Why? Because their mind is overstimulated, conditioned to seek constant input, constant novelty, constant escape. And when that's removed, they don't feel calm. They feel restless. This is the modern challenge of discipline. It's not just about doing hard things. It's about resisting easy ones. Because today, distractions are designed, engineered, optimized to hold your attention. And every time you give in, you train your brain to expect it. You lower your tolerance for focus. You weaken your ability to stay with discomfort. And without that ability, discipline collapses. This is why so many people struggle to stay consistent. Not because they don't care, but because they've lost the ability to stay uncomfortable long enough to grow. So, here's the shift. You don't need to eliminate comfort. You need to control it. You need to decide when it's earned and when it's stealing from your future, because comfort before effort creates regret. But comfort after effort creates reward. That's the difference. Now let's go deeper. There are two versions of you, the present you and the future you. The present you wants comfort. The future you needs discipline. And every decision you make either serves one or the other. When you choose comfort in the moment, you're borrowing from your future, time, energy, opportunity, and eventually that debt shows up as stress, as regret, as frustration. But when you choose discipline, even when it's uncomfortable, you invest in your future. You build something, strength, clarity, confidence. And over time, that investment compounds. This is why discipline feels hard at first, because you're breaking a pattern. You're going against what's familiar. But that discomfort, it's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something different. And different is where change begins. So the next time you feel that resistance, that urge to escape, pause. Don't react immediately. Just notice it. Name it. This is comfort trying to take over. And then ask yourself one question. Who am I choosing right now? The version of you that stays the same, or the version of you that grows? Because that moment, that small, almost invisible decision, is where your future shifts. Not in big breakthroughs, in quiet choices, repeated daily. Now here's something powerful. Discipline doesn't mean you never feel resistance. It means resistance doesn't control you. You feel it, you acknowledge it, and you act anyway. That's strength, not the absence of struggle, but the ability to move through it. And once you build that ability, everything changes, because you stop waiting to feel ready. You stop depending on motivation. You stop negotiating. You just act consistently, relentlessly, quietly. And that's when people start to notice something different about you. Not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. You become reliable, focused, grounded. You become someone who follows through. And that is rare. Now imagine what happens when that becomes your default. When discipline is no longer something you try to do, but something you are. That's where unstoppable begins. But before you reach that point, There's another layer you need to understand, because even if you control comfort, there's something deeper, something internal that can still pull you off track. Something that disguises itself as logic, but quietly weakens your action. And in the next chapter, you're going to confront it directly. Because if you don't, it will keep showing up in every important moment of your life. Chapter 4. The Illusion of I'll Do It Later. There is a sentence that has quietly stolen more dreams than failure ever could. I'll do it later. It sounds harmless. It sounds logical, responsible even. You're not saying no. You're just postponing. But here's the truth most people never confront. Later is where discipline goes to die. Because later is not a plan. It's an escape. A delay disguised as intention. And the longer you use it, the stronger it becomes. Think about how often you've said it. I'll start tomorrow. I'll do it tonight. I'll get serious next week. And then what happens? Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. And eventually, you stop believing yourself. Not consciously, but internally, because every time you delay, you break trust with yourself. And trust is the foundation of discipline. Without it, nothing sticks. Let me show you something deeper. Procrastination is not about laziness. It's about avoidance. Avoidance of discomfort, avoidance of uncertainty, avoidance of effort. Your brain is wired to protect you, to keep you safe. And sometimes it mistakes growth for danger. So when you face something challenging, it doesn't say, this will make you stronger. It says, this feels uncomfortable. Avoid it. And later becomes the perfect solution. You don't have to face it now. You don't have to feel it now. You escape. But every escape comes with a cost. Because the task doesn't disappear. It waits. And while it waits, it grows in your mind. It becomes heavier, more overwhelming, more intimidating, until eventually you don't just delay it, you dread it. This is the cycle. Delay to pressure to avoidance to guilt to repeat. And most people live in this loop for years, not because they can't break it, but because they never see it clearly. So let's make it clear. The problem is not the task. The problem is your relationship with action. Because right now, you act based on how you feel. And feelings are unstable. Some days you're motivated. Some days you're not. Some days you feel strong. Some days you feel tired. If your action depends on that, your progress will always be inconsistent. This is where discipline changes everything, because discipline removes the question. It removes the debate. It replaces, do I feel like it, with, it gets done. No negotiation, no delay, no later. Now that doesn't mean it's easy. It means it's decided. And that decision is powerful. Because once something is decided, you stop wasting energy thinking about it. You just execute. This is how high performers operate, not because they're always motivated, but because they're committed. They've removed later from their vocabulary. They don't ask, when should I start? They ask, why am I not starting now? That shift changes everything, because action creates clarity, not the other way around. Most people wait to feel ready before they begin. But readiness comes from movement. Confidence is built through action, not before it. So if you're waiting to feel ready, you'll wait forever. Now let's get practical. The next time you catch yourself saying, I'll do it later, pause and replace it with this. Start for 5 minutes. That's it. Not the whole task. Not perfection. Just 5 minutes. Because starting is the hardest part. Once you begin, momentum takes over, and momentum is one of the most powerful forces in discipline. It carries you forward, it reduces resistance, it makes continuation easier, but it only activates after you start. So your job is simple. Don't focus on finishing. Focus on beginning, again and again. Now here's something that might challenge you. What if the real reason you delay is not the task itself, but the identity you've attached to it? I'm not the type of person who follows through. I always procrastinate. I struggle with discipline. Those beliefs shape your behavior because you act in alignment with who you think you are. So when you say, "I'll do it later," you're not just delaying a task. You're reinforcing that identity. But every time you act immediately, even in a small way, you challenge it. You create new evidence. I start things. I follow through. I take action. And slowly, that becomes your new baseline. This is how transformation happens. Not through massive change, but through consistent contradiction of old patterns. Now listen closely. Discipline is not about being perfect. It's about being reliable. Reliable to yourself, reliable in your actions, reliable in your commitments. And reliability is built through repetition, through doing what you said you would do, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when nobody is watching. Because at the end of the day, the only person you can't lie to is yourself. And the more you prove to yourself that you act, the stronger you become. So the next time later shows up, recognize it, call it out, and choose differently, because your future is not built later. It's built now, in this moment, in this decision, in this action, and in the next chapter. You're going to learn how to take that action, even when your mind is working against you, because understanding discipline is one thing, but mastering your thoughts, that's where the real power begins. We're so glad you decided to watch our video. We're also really curious to know which cities around the world are watching our videos. Could you let us know which city, or at least which country, you're from? We always read every comment under our videos carefully. Thank you. Chapter 5. Mastering the voice in your head. There is a conversation happening inside you every single day. You don't always notice it, but it's there. Commenting, questioning, judging, deciding, and whether you realize it or not. That voice is shaping your life, because before every action, there is a thought. Before every decision, there is a story. And if that story is weak, your actions will follow. This is where most people lose control, not in the outside world, but in their own mind. They think discipline is about controlling behavior. But behavior comes after thought. If your thinking is scattered, your actions will be inconsistent. If your thoughts are negative, your discipline will collapse under pressure. So if you want to become unstoppable, you don't just train your actions, you train your mind. Now let's be honest, your mind is not always on your side. Sometimes it doubts you, sometimes it distracts you, sometimes it convinces you to quit. And the problem is, most people believe everything they think. They treat thoughts like facts. But here's the truth. Not every thought deserves your attention. Some thoughts are noise, old patterns, conditioned fears, automatic reactions. And if you don't learn to separate yourself from them, they will control you. Let me show you how this works. You decide to do something important. Maybe it's working on your goals. Maybe it's improving your habits. And then a thought appears. Quote 58, quote 59, quote 60. Now pause. Where did that thought come from? Did you consciously choose it, or did it just show up? That's the key. Thoughts appear, but you choose whether to believe them. And most people believe them automatically. That's why they feel stuck, because they're reacting to thoughts instead of observing them. But discipline begins with awareness. The moment you realize, everything changes, because now you have space to choose. Instead of reacting instantly, you pause, you notice, you label, and when you label it, you weaken it. Because now it's not you, it's just a thought passing through, and thoughts can pass. But only if you don't grab onto them. This is mental discipline, not forcing positivity, not ignoring reality, but choosing which thoughts deserve power. Now, let's go deeper. There are 3 types of thoughts you need to recognize. The first is protective thinking. This is your brain trying to keep you safe. Avoid risk. Avoid discomfort. Avoid failure. It sounds like quote 65, quote 66, quote 67. This voice is not evil. It's just outdated. It was designed to protect you from danger. But now, it protects you from growth. And if you listen to it too much, you stay stuck. The second type is habitual thinking. This is repetition, patterns you've built over time. Quote 68, quote 69, quote 70. These thoughts feel true because you've repeated them so often, but they're not truth. They're memory, old evidence. And if you want to change, you need to stop reinforcing them. The third type is intentional thinking. This is where discipline lives. This is where you decide, quote 71, quote 72, quote 73. This is not automatic. It requires effort, awareness, choice. But this is the level where your life changes, because when you control your thinking, you control your actions. And when you control your actions, you control your results. Now here's something powerful. You don't need to eliminate negative thoughts. You just need to stop obeying them. Because discipline is not about feeling strong. It's about acting strong, even when your thoughts are weak. So the next time your mind says, quote 74, you respond with action. When it says, quote 75, you move anyway, not to prove the thought wrong, but to prove to yourself that you are in control. That's the shift. You stop waiting for your mind to agree, and you lead yourself forward. Now imagine what happens over time. Every time you act despite doubt, you build confidence. Every time you ignore distraction, you build focus. Every time you follow through, you build trust. And that trust becomes your foundation. Because once you trust yourself, discipline becomes natural. You don't need motivation. You don't need external pressure. You become self-driven, internally aligned, unstoppable. But here's the challenge. This doesn't happen overnight because your mind has been trained for years. And breaking those patterns requires consistency, requires repetition, requires patience. But every time you choose awareness over reaction, you're rewriting your programming slowly, powerfully, permanently. And in the next chapter, you're going to learn how to turn that awareness into a system, a structure you can rely on, even when your mind is chaotic. Because discipline is not just mental, it's strategic. And once you understand that, everything becomes easier to execute. Chapter 6. Build systems that carry you. There will be days when your mind is sharp, clear, focused, ready, and there will be days when it's not. Days when you feel scattered, distracted, unmotivated, and if your discipline depends on how you feel, those days will break you. That's why discipline is not just mental, it's structural. Because when your mind is weak, your system must be strong. This is where most people fail. They rely on willpower. They rely on motivation. They rely on quote 76 but willpower fades. Motivation fluctuates. Effort alone is inconsistent. What you need is something that works even when you don't feel like working. A system. Now understand this clearly. A system is not a schedule. It's not a perfect routine. It's a structure that reduces decision-making and makes action automatic. Because the more decisions you have to make, the more chances you have to hesitate. And hesitation kills discipline. So your goal is simple. Remove the need to think where you can. Let me give you an example. If every morning you wake up and ask, quote, 77 you've already lost, because now it's a debate, and your feelings will try to win. But if your system says, quote, 78, there's no question, no debate, just execution. That's power, not because it's exciting, but because it's consistent. Now here's the deeper layer. Systems protect you from yourself, from your moods, from your excuses, from your impulses. They act as a framework that keeps you moving forward even when your mind tries to pull you back. And the best part? Once a system is in place, it requires less energy over time because repetition builds familiarity. Familiarity builds ease. Ease builds consistency, and consistency builds results. This is how discipline becomes sustainable, not through force, but through design. Now let's build one. Start with one area of your life, not everything, just one. Maybe it's your morning routine, maybe it's your work, maybe it's your health. And ask yourself, quote 79, not something extreme, not something unrealistic, something simple, something repeatable. Because the goal is not intensity, the goal is consistency. Once you have that action, attach it to a trigger, a specific time, a specific event. Quote 80, quote 81. This removes uncertainty. It creates structure, and structure creates discipline. Now here's something most people overlook. Your environment matters more than you think, because your environment shapes your behavior. If your phone is always within reach, you'll reach for it. If distractions are visible, you'll get distracted. So don't rely on resistance. Remove temptation. Put your phone in another room. Create a clean workspace. Design your environment for focus, because discipline is easier when the path is clear. Now listen carefully. You don't need a perfect system. You need a reliable one, something you can follow, even on your worst days. Because those days are what define you, not the days when everything feels easy, but the days when it doesn't. And your system is what carries you through them. Now imagine this. You wake up, you don't think, you don't debate, you follow your system. You move through your day with structure, with clarity, with intention, and at the end of the day, you've done what you said you would do, not because you felt like it, but because it was built into your life. That's discipline, quiet, reliable, powerful, and over time, it compounds. One day becomes a week becomes a month becomes a new identity, and suddenly you're not trying to be disciplined anymore. You are disciplined. But here's the truth most people don't expect. Even with a system, even with structure, there will still be moments. where everything inside you resists, moments where you want to break the pattern, moments where you feel like giving up. And in those moments, your system won't be enough. You'll need something deeper, something internal, something that reminds you why you started. And in the next chapter, you're going to discover that force, the one thing that fuels discipline when everything else fades, the reason behind the action, the fire behind the structure. Because without it, even the best system will eventually collapse. Chapter 7. The reason you don't quit. There will come a moment when your system feels heavy, when your routine feels repetitive, when your mind says, quote, 82. And in that moment, structure is not enough. Discipline alone is not enough, because without a reason, effort feels empty. This is where most people fall off, not at the beginning, but in the middle, when the excitement is gone, when results are slow, when nobody is watching. That's when the question appears. Quote, 83. And if you don't have a clear answer, you drift, you slow down, you hesitate, you eventually stop. Not because you're incapable, but because you lost connection to your reason. So let's rebuild it, because discipline without purpose is fragile. But discipline with purpose is unstoppable. Now listen carefully. Your reason cannot be surface level. It can't just be, quote, 84, quote, 85, quote, 86. That's not strong enough. Because when things get hard, surface reasons disappear. You need something deeper, something that holds weight, something that feels personal. So ask yourself, why do you really want to change? Not the easy answer, the real one. Is it because you're tired of repeating the same cycle, tired of feeling stuck, tired of knowing you're capable of more, but not living it? Is it because you want freedom, control, respect for yourself? Or maybe it's because you've seen what happens when you don't change. The regret, the frustration, the quiet disappointment that builds over time. That feeling, that's powerful. Because pain can be a driver, not to hold you back, but to push you forward. Now here's the key. You need to make your reason visible, not just something you think about occasionally, but something you see daily. Write it down, say it out loud, remind yourself, because when discipline gets tested, memory fades. And in those moments, you need something to anchor you, something that pulls you back to focus. Now, let's go deeper. There are two types of motivation, external and internal. External motivation comes from results, progress, recognition, validation. It feels good, but it's temporary, because when results slow down, motivation fades. Internal motivation comes from identity, from purpose, from who you are becoming, and that is stable, because it doesn't depend on outcomes. It depends on alignment. When your actions match your values, you feel driven, not because you have to, but because it feels right. This is where discipline becomes powerful, because now you're not forcing yourself, you're expressing yourself, you're acting in alignment with who you've decided to be, and that creates momentum. Now imagine this. You wake up, and instead of asking, quote, 87, you ask, quote, 88. That question changes everything, because it shifts your focus from emotion to identity, and identity is consistent. It doesn't change with mood. It doesn't disappear when things get hard. It stays, and it guides your actions. So if you see yourself as someone disciplined, someone focused, someone reliable, you start acting that way, not perfectly, but consistently. And over time, that identity becomes real because it's backed by action. Now, here's something important. Your reason will evolve. What drives you today might not be what drives you tomorrow, and that's okay. But the habit of connecting to your reason must stay, because that connection is what keeps you going when things get difficult, when progress feels slow, when your mind starts to wander. Now listen to this carefully. Discipline is not about pushing yourself endlessly. It's about aligning yourself consistently with your values, with your goals, with your future. And your reason is what keeps that alignment strong. So the next time you feel like stopping, pause. Don't react immediately. Ask yourself, quote, 89, and don't answer quickly. Sit with it, feel it, let it remind you, because that reminder is fuel. Now here's the truth. There will be days when your reason feels distant, when it's not enough to push you. And in those moments, you don't rely on feeling, you rely on habit, you rely on identity, you rely on discipline. Because motivation may come and go, but discipline stays. And when those two work together, you become unstoppable. Now, we've built awareness, we've built structure, we've built purpose. But there's still one piece missing, because even with all of this, there is a hidden pattern that quietly breaks consistency, a pattern that shows up right when you start making progress, right when things begin to improve. And if you don't recognize it, you will keep starting over again and again and again. In the next chapter, you're going to uncover that pattern, and once you see it, you'll understand why so many people never reach their full potential. Chapter 8, The Reset Trap. You start strong, focused, disciplined, clear on what you need to do. For a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you're consistent. You follow your system. You take action. You feel momentum building, and then something happens. You miss a day, just one. Maybe you were tired, busy, distracted, and in that moment, a thought appears, and that thought becomes a turning point, because instead of continuing, you reset, and just like that, momentum disappears. This is the reset trap, and it's one of the most dangerous patterns because it feels productive. It feels like you're being responsible, like you're trying to quote 94, but in reality, you're delaying progress. Again, let's break this down. Why do people reset? Because they believe discipline requires perfection. They think underscore, quote, underscore 95, underscore. But discipline is not perfection. Discipline is continuity. It's not about never missing. It's about never quitting. Because missing once is an event, but quitting, that's a pattern. And most people don't fail because they miss one day. They fail because they let one miss turn into many. Now here's the truth you need to hear. One bad day does not destroy progress, but one bad decision after that day can. The decision to stop, the decision to delay, the decision to reset. That's what breaks you, not the mistake. So instead of resetting, you need to learn to recover. Immediately, no drama, no overthinking, just return. Missed your workout? Do it the next day. Lost focus? Refocus in the next hour. Fell off track? Step back on right now. Because discipline is not built on perfect streaks. It's built on fast recoveries. The faster you return, the stronger you become. Now let's go deeper. Why does the reset trap feel so powerful? Because your brain loves clean starts. It likes the idea of, quote, 96, quote, 97, quote, 98. But that's an illusion because real life is messy, unpredictable, imperfect. And if your discipline only works in perfect conditions, it's not discipline. It's convenience. True discipline works in chaos, in busy days, in low-energy moments, in imperfect situations, because that's where growth happens. So the goal is not to create a perfect routine. The goal is to create a resilient one, a routine that bends but doesn't break. Now here's a powerful shift. Stop measuring success by streaks. Start measuring it by returns. Not, quote, 99, but, quote, 100. Because that's what matters. That's what builds identity. Someone who returns becomes reliable. Someone who resets stays inconsistent. Now imagine this. You miss a day, but instead of spiraling, you continue. No guilt, no overthinking, just action. That one decision changes everything because now you've broken the pattern. You've proven to yourself, quote, 101. And that belief is powerful. Now here's something most people don't realize. Guilt is what fuels the reset trap. You feel bad for missing. You feel like you failed. And instead of facing that feeling, you escape it by resetting. But guilt doesn't help you. It holds you back because it keeps your focus on the past instead of the next action. So the moment you make a mistake, drop the guilt, learn the lesson, move forward immediately because discipline is forward-focused. It doesn't dwell, it doesn't punish, it executes. Now listen carefully. There is no perfect time to restart. There is only the next moment, and that moment is always available right now. So the next time you feel the urge to reset, pause and remind yourself, quote, 102, because that mindset is what separates those who succeed from those who stay stuck in cycles. Now imagine what happens over time. You stop starting over. You stop losing momentum. You build consistency, even through mistakes. And that consistency becomes unstoppable. But here's where it gets even deeper. Because once you stop resetting, you'll face something new. A different kind of challenge, not starting, not consistency, but endurance. Because discipline is not just about showing up, it's about staying. When things get repetitive, when progress slows, when nothing feels exciting anymore, and in the next chapter, you're going to learn how to push through that phase, the phase where most people quit quietly, even though they were so close to breaking through. If you like this audiobook, please give it a like. It will really help us promote the video. Chapter 9, The Plateau of Discipline. At the beginning, everything feels different. New habits, new focus, new energy. You feel progress. You see change. And for a while, it's exciting. But then something shifts. The results slow down. The routine feels repetitive. The progress becomes invisible. And this is where most people quit. Not at the start, not in failure, but in the plateau. That quiet phase where nothing seems to be happening, where your effort feels the same, but the reward feels distant, and your mind starts asking, quote, 103, quote, 104, quote, 105. This is the test, not of your ability, but of your patience, because the plateau is not where progress stops. It's where progress is being built, quietly, under the surface. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. Think about it like this. If you go to the gym, the first few weeks, you feel sore, you feel the effort, but after a while, you don't feel that same intensity. Does that mean you've stopped improving? No. It means your body is adapting. The same is true for discipline. At first, everything feels new, challenging, but over time, it becomes normal. And when something becomes normal, you stop noticing it. That's the plateau. And most people misinterpret it. They think underscore underscore quote underscore 106 underscore underscore. But the truth is, you're stabilizing, you're reinforcing, you're turning actions into identity. And that process is quiet. Now here's the danger. When progress feels invisible, motivation drops. Because your brain wants feedback. It wants proof that effort equals results. And when that proof isn't obvious, it starts looking for something else, something new, something exciting. This is why people jump from one habit to another, from one plan to another, from one idea to another, chasing the feeling of progress, instead of building real progress. But discipline requires something different. It requires staying. When it's no longer exciting, it requires continuing. When it feels ordinary, because that's where mastery begins, not in the peak, but in the repetition. Now let's go deeper. The plateau is where your identity is tested, because when results are visible, it's easy to stay consistent. But when they're not, you're left with one question, quote 107, and your answer to that question defines your future. Because anyone can act when they feel progress, but very few can act when they don't. And those few are the ones who break through. Now imagine this. You keep going, even when it feels repetitive, even when it feels slow, even when nobody notices, day after day, week after week. And then something shifts. Suddenly, the results appear. Not gradually, but all at once. Clarity improves, confidence grows, opportunities open. And it feels like it happened overnight. But it didn't. It was built during the plateau, in the quiet, in the repetition, in the moments where you chose to continue, when it would have been easier to stop. This is how real growth works, not linear, but layered, invisible, until it's undeniable. Now here's the mindset you need to adopt. Stop chasing results. Start respecting the process, because the process is what creates the results. And if you fall in love with the process, you become consistent. If you only love the outcome, you become inconsistent, because outcomes take time. Processes happen daily. So shift your focus from underscore underscore quote underscore 108 underscore underscore to quote 109. Because every day you show up, you're not just completing tasks, you're building identity, and identity is permanent. Now listen to this carefully. The plateau is not a problem. It's a phase, a necessary phase, a strengthening phase. And if you can push through it, you separate yourself from the majority, because most people never make it past this point. They quit too early. They change direction too fast. They abandon progress right before it becomes visible. Don't be one of them. Stay. Continue. Trust the process, even when it's quiet, even when it's slow, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Because something's happening, you're becoming disciplined. You're becoming focused. You're becoming someone who doesn't quit. And that transformation is more powerful than any short-term result. Now here's the next challenge, because once you push through the plateau, you'll face something even more subtle, something that doesn't feel like resistance, but quietly weakens your progress, something that most people don't even recognize. until it's too late. And in the next chapter, you're going to uncover it. Because if you don't, it will slowly pull you back into the very patterns you've been trying to escape. Chapter 10. The slow drift back. You've felt it before. You're consistent, focused, disciplined. You're doing the work. And then nothing dramatic happens. No big failure, no obvious mistake, just a slow shift. You wake up one day, slightly less focused. You skip something small. You delay just a little, and you tell yourself, quote 110. And it is, at first, because the drift doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. That's what makes it dangerous, because you don't notice it until you're already off track. This is the slow drift, and it's one of the biggest reasons people lose discipline, even after they've built it. Let's break it down. Discipline is not lost in a moment. It's lost in a pattern, a series of small decisions that seem harmless, but lead you away from your standard. You skip one habit, you relax your routine, you allow more distractions, and nothing breaks immediately. So you repeat it again and again until what was once a strong system becomes optional, flexible, inconsistent, and suddenly you're back where you started. Not because you failed, but because you drifted. Now here's the truth. Drift is more dangerous than failure, because failure is obvious. It forces you to respond. But drift feels normal. It doesn't trigger urgency. It doesn't demand correction. It just slowly changes your direction until your results reflect it. So how do you stop it? You raise your awareness, because drift thrives in unconscious behavior. When you stop paying attention, it takes over. So you need to check in with yourself regularly, not once a month, not once a week. Daily, ask yourself, __, quote, _111, __, not perfectly, but directionally. Because discipline is not about being perfect. It's about staying on course. Now here's something powerful. You don't need to fix everything when you drift. You just need to correct your direction. Think of it like steering. If you're slightly off course, you don't panic. You adjust, small correction, back on track, that's it. But most people don't do that. They ignore the drift until it becomes too big to ignore, and then they feel overwhelmed, frustrated, disconnected, so they reset, and the cycle repeats. But you're not going to do that. You're going to catch it early. Now let's go deeper. Drift often starts with justification. You tell yourself, quote 112, quote 113, quote 114. And again, these sound reasonable. But discipline is not about what sounds reasonable. It's about what moves you forward. Because progress doesn't come from occasional effort. It comes from consistent standards. Now listen carefully. You can rest without drifting. You can pause without losing discipline. But there's a difference. Rest is intentional. Drift is unconscious. Rest has boundaries. Drift has none. So if you need a break, take it. But decide it. Define it. Control it. Don't let it happen by default. Because default behavior is what pulls you back. Now here's a powerful tool. Create a daily reset point, a moment in your day where you reflect, where you ask, not to judge yourself, but to stay aware, because awareness prevents drift from growing. Now imagine this. Every day you check in, you adjust, you stay aligned, not perfectly, but consistently, and over time, that awareness becomes automatic. You notice when you're slipping. You correct faster. You stay on track longer. And that's how discipline becomes stable, not fragile. Now here's the deeper truth. You will drift at some point. It's part of the process. But what matters is how quickly you return. Because discipline is not about never drifting. It's about never staying there. So the moment you notice it, act. Don't wait. Don't overthink. Correct immediately. Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Now listen to this. You don't lose discipline overnight. You lose it in silence, in small moments, in unnoticed shifts. So your job is to stay awake, to stay aware, to stay intentional. Because once you do, drift loses its power and your direction becomes clear again. Now, you've built awareness, you've built structure, you've built purpose, you've learned to avoid resets and recognize drift. But there's one final layer, one that determines whether all of this actually sticks. Because discipline is not just about what you do. It's about how you see yourself. And in the next chapter, you're going to redefine that completely. Because once your identity shifts, everything else becomes easier. Chapter 11, Becoming the Standard. At some point, you have to stop asking quote 118 and start asking quote 119 Because everything you've built so far, awareness, structure, consistency, recovery, all of it leads to this moment. Identity, because discipline that lives outside of you will always feel like effort. But discipline that lives inside of you becomes your standard. Now listen carefully. You don't rise to your goals. You rise to your identity. If you see yourself as someone inconsistent, you will find ways to be inconsistent. If you see yourself as someone distracted, you will drift. If you see yourself as someone who quote 120, you will keep trying without becoming. That's the trap. Most people focus on actions, but ignore identity. They say, quote 121, quote 122, quote 123, but they never say, quote 124. And that difference changes everything. Because when something becomes part of your identity, it's no longer optional. It's expected. You don't question it. You don't negotiate it. You live it. Now think about this. You don't wake up and ask quote 125 no. It's automatic because it's part of who you are. That's what discipline needs to become. Not something you force, but something you embody. Now here's how you build that. Through evidence, not words, not affirmations. Action, repeated action. Because identity is not what you say. It's what you prove. Every time you follow through, you cast a vote. Every time you act despite resistance, you cast a vote. Every time you stay consistent, you cast a vote. And over time, those votes add up until the evidence becomes undeniable. Quote 126 Not because you said it, but because you lived it. Now here's something important. You don't need to be perfect. To build identity, you need to be consistent. Because identity is not built in extremes. It's built in patterns. So even if you're not perfect, if you keep showing up, if you keep acting, if you keep aligning, you are building it. Now let's go deeper. There's a difference between identity and intention. Intention says quote 127 identity says quote 128 intention hopes. Identity decides. And once you decide who you are, your actions begin to follow. Now imagine this. You face a moment of resistance. You feel tired, unmotivated, distracted, and instead of asking, quote, 129, you ask, quote, 130, and you act accordingly, not because it's easy, but because it's aligned. That's identity-based discipline, and it's powerful because it removes emotion from the equation. It replaces it with standards. Now listen to this carefully. Your standards define your life, not your goals, not your intentions, your standards, what you tolerate, what you allow, what you accept from yourself. If your standards are low, your results will reflect it. If your standards are high, your behavior will rise to meet them. So the question is, what is your standard? Do you allow inconsistency? Do you allow excuses? Do you allow distraction? Or do you hold yourself to something higher? Because discipline is not built on desire, it's built on standards. Now here's the shift. Stop asking, quote, 131, start asking, quote, 132. Because when you remove tolerance, you remove options. And when you remove options, you create clarity. Now there's only one path, forward. Now imagine what happens when you live this way, when your identity is clear, when your standards are strong, when your actions are aligned. You don't need reminders. You don't need motivation. You don't need external pressure. You become self-directed, self-controlled, self-disciplined, and that is freedom. Not doing whatever you feel like, but being in control of what you do. Now here's the truth. This doesn't happen instantly. Identity takes time. It takes repetition. It takes proof. But every day you show up, you are building it, brick by brick, decision by decision, until one day you realize something has changed. You don't hesitate like before. You don't drift like before. You don't reset like before. You just act consistently, reliably, powerfully. And that's when you know you've crossed the line from trying to becoming. But there's one final challenge ahead, because once you become disciplined, the world doesn't get easier. In fact, it may test you even more, with pressure, with distractions, with unexpected obstacles. And in the next chapter, you're going to learn how to stay unshaken no matter what life throws at you, because true discipline is not just about routine, it's about resilience. Hang on a sec. Write in the comments what you'd like us to talk about in the next video. We promise to read all the comments and pick the best and most relevant topics. Thanks. Chapter 12. Discipline under pressure. It's easy to stay disciplined when everything is calm, when your schedule is clear, when your energy is high, when nothing is pulling you in different directions. But life doesn't stay like that. Pressure comes, unexpected problems, stress, fatigue, distractions that feel stronger than your focus. And in those moments, your discipline is tested. Not your plans, not your intentions, your core. Because pressure reveals the truth. It shows you what you've actually built. Not what you hoped for, but what's real. Now here's the reality most people avoid. When pressure hits, they don't rise, they fall back to old habits, old patterns, old reactions. Why? Because under pressure, you don't perform at your best. You perform at your trained level. That's why everything you've done so far matters. Every small action, every repeated habit, every moment you chose discipline over comfort. You weren't just building routine, you were building resilience. Now let's go deeper. Pressure creates noise. Your mind becomes louder, more reactive, more emotional, more chaotic. And if you're not trained, that noise takes over. You rush decisions, you lose focus, you abandon structure. But if your discipline is strong, you do something different. You slow down, not physically, mentally. You create space between what happens and how you respond. That space is power. Because most people don't have it. They react instantly. They let emotions lead. But discipline teaches you to pause, to observe, to choose, even under pressure. Now imagine this. Something goes wrong. Your plan gets disrupted. Your day becomes unpredictable. And instead of spiraling, you adjust. Calmly, deliberately, you don't panic, you don't quit, you adapt. That's resilience, not avoiding pressure, but handling it with control. Now here's the key. You don't build resilience in chaos. You build it in repetition, in the quiet moments, in the daily actions. Because every time you stay disciplined, even when it's small, you're training your response. So when pressure comes, you don't need to think. You respond based on who you've become. That's why consistency matters. Because it prepares you for moments you can't predict. Now let's talk about emotional control. Because pressure is not just external, it's internal. Frustration, stress, doubt. And if you let those emotions lead, they will break your discipline. So you need a rule. Simple, clear. I don't make decisions based on temporary emotions. Let that sink in. Because emotions pass, but decisions stay. And one emotional decision can undo weeks of progress. So when you feel overwhelmed, pause, not to escape, but to regain control. Take a breath, step back mentally and ask, what is the next right action? Not the perfect one, not the big one, just the next. Because discipline under pressure is not about doing everything, it's about doing something consistently. Now here's another truth. Pressure will try to break your standards. It will tempt you to lower them. Just this once. It doesn't matter right now. I'll fix it later. And again, it sounds reasonable. But this is where identity matters. Because if your standards are clear, you don't negotiate. You adapt your approach, but not your principles. You may change the plan, but you don't abandon the mission. That's strength. Now imagine this version of you, calm under pressure, focused in chaos, reliable no matter the situation, not because life is easy, but because you are steady. That's what discipline builds, not just productivity, but stability. Now listen carefully. Life will test you again and again with situations you didn't plan for, moments you didn't expect. And in those moments, you will either fall back or stand firm. And what determines that? Not motivation, not luck. Discipline, built over time, strengthened through repetition, proven under pressure. Now here's the final truth of this chapter. You don't become unstoppable by avoiding hard moments. You become unstoppable by surviving them, learning from them, and coming back stronger every time, because pressure doesn't break you, it reveals you. And if what it reveals is discipline, then nothing can stop you. Now we've built something powerful: awareness, structure, identity, resilience. But there's still one level left, the level where discipline becomes effortless, where action feels natural, where consistency becomes automatic. And in the next chapter, you're going to step into that level, because this is where everything you've built starts to compound and your life begins to transform in ways you didn't expect. Chapter 13. When discipline becomes automatic, there is a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, where everything begins to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but internally you wake up. And instead of fighting yourself, you move, you don't debate, you don't hesitate, you act, and it feel normal. That's the shift. The moment discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like identity. Now understand this clearly. This is not where discipline disappears. This is where resistance loses control, because the actions you once forced have now become familiar, and familiarity creates ease. But most people never reach this point because they quit too early. They stop during the plateau. They reset after mistakes. They drift when things get comfortable. And because of that, they never experience what consistency truly creates. But you stayed. You continued. You built patterns. And now, those patterns are working for you instead of against you. Now let's go deeper. When discipline becomes automatic, something powerful happens. You free up mental energy because you're no longer constantly deciding. You're no longer negotiating. You've removed the friction, and that energy can now be used for growth, for focus, for creativity, for higher level thinking. This is where people begin to accelerate because they're not stuck in basic struggles anymore. They've mastered the foundation, and now they can build on it. Now imagine this version of you. You have a routine, and you follow it without resistance. You have standards, and you live by them without question. You have focus, and you protect it without effort. That's power. Not because it's intense, but because it's consistent. Now here's something important. Just because discipline becomes easier does not mean you can relax your awareness, because comfort can still creep in. Drift can still happen, but the difference now is that you notice faster, you correct quicker, you stay aligned, because your identity is stronger. Now listen carefully. Automatic discipline is not about perfection, it's about default behavior. It's what you do without thinking, and that's what you've been building. Every repetition, every action, every decision, you've been programming yourself. And now, that programming is working in your favor. Now here's where it gets exciting, because once discipline becomes automatic, results begin to compound faster, stronger, more consistently, because you're no longer starting and stopping. You're building continuously, and continuous effort creates exponential growth. Now think about this. If you improve just a little every day and you stay consistent, what happens over time? You don't just grow, you transform, because small improvements stack day after day, week after week, month after month, until the difference is undeniable. Now here's the mindset shift. Stop looking for big changes. Start respecting small ones, because big results are built on small actions, repeated consistently. Now imagine this. 6 months from now, you've stayed disciplined. You've followed your system. You've maintained your standards. Who are you? Stronger, clearer, more confident. Not because something magical happened, but because you stayed consistent. That's the blueprint. Simple, but powerful. Now here's the truth. Most people want results without becoming the person who can sustain them. But you've done the work. You've built the identity. And now, results are not something you chase. They're something you create naturally. Now listen to this. You don't need to push harder. You need to stay consistent. Because at this level, consistency beats intensity every time. Now here's the final layer of this chapter. Gratitude, not for what you have, but for who you've become. Because discipline is not just about outcomes, it's about transformation. The version of you who started this journey is not the version of you now. You've grown, you've learned, you've built something real, and that deserves recognition, not to celebrate and stop, but to acknowledge and continue. Because this is not the end. It's a new beginning, a new level, a new standard, and in the next chapter, you're going to expand beyond discipline into something even more powerful. Because discipline is the foundation. But what you build on top of it, that's where your life truly changes. Chapter 14, Expanding Beyond Discipline. You've built something most people never do. Control, not over the world, but over yourself, your actions, your focus, your consistency. And that changes everything. Because once you can control yourself, you stop reacting to life and you start shaping it. Now listen carefully. Discipline is not the final goal, it's the foundation. It's what allows you to build something greater. Clarity, vision, impact. Because without discipline, ideas stay ideas, goals stay goals, potential stays unused. But with discipline, you execute, you move, you create. And that's where life begins to open up. Now ask yourself this. If you could trust yourself completely, what would you go after? What would you build? What would you change? What would you finally commit to? Because now, you're not guessing anymore. You're not hoping you'll follow through. You know you will, and that certainty is power. Now here's the shift. Stop thinking about what you can do. Start thinking about what you will do, because discipline turns possibility into decision, and decision into reality. Now let's go deeper. Most people live reactively. They respond to what happens. They adjust based on circumstances. They wait for the right moment. But disciplined people live proactively. They decide. They act. They create momentum. And momentum changes everything. Because once you're moving, you gain clarity. You see opportunities. You recognize patterns. You adapt faster. Action creates awareness, and awareness leads to better action. This is the cycle of growth. Now imagine this. You have a goal, not just something vague, but something real, something that matters. And instead of overthinking it, you break it down. You apply your system. You execute daily. No hesitation, no delay. And over time, that goal becomes reality. Not because it was easy, but because you stayed consistent. That's the power of discipline applied to purpose. Now here's something important. With discipline, you must choose direction carefully, because discipline amplifies everything. If your focus is scattered, you'll become consistently scattered. If your direction is unclear, you'll move, but without progress. So take time to define your path, not perfectly, but intentionally. What matters to you? What are you building? What kind of life do you want to create? Because once you align discipline with direction, you become unstoppable. Now let's talk about responsibility. Because this is where many people hesitate. They want results, but they avoid ownership. They want change, but they resist commitment. But discipline removes that option. Because once you realize, I can control my actions, you can no longer blame. Not your situation, not your past, not other people. Because now you know, you have influence, you have power, and that can feel heavy. But it's also freeing, because it means you're not stuck, you're in control. Now listen to this. Responsibility is not a burden. It's a tool. It gives you direction. It gives you clarity. It gives you the ability to change your life. And discipline is what allows you to carry it. Now imagine this version of you, clear on your goals, consistent in your actions, responsible for your outcomes, not perfect, but intentional. That's growth. Now here's the truth. You don't need more information. You don't need more advice. You need execution. Because everything you need is already within reach. The difference is action. Now listen carefully. There will always be more to learn, more to improve, more to build, but none of it matters if you don't act. So take what you've built and apply it daily, consistently, without overthinking. Because clarity comes from movement, not from waiting. Now here's the deeper layer. Once you become disciplined, you become a leader, not necessarily for others, but for yourself. You lead your thoughts. You lead your actions. You lead your direction. And that leadership spreads. People notice, not because you talk about it, but because you live it. And that presence, that consistency, that reliability, it influences others, quietly, powerfully. Now imagine the impact, not just on your life, but on the people around you. Because when you raise your standard, you raise the environment. That's the ripple effect of discipline. Now here's the final truth of this chapter. You didn't build discipline just to stay where you are. You built it to go further, to grow more, to become more. And the next step is not just maintaining it, it's expanding it into every area of your life, your work, your health, your relationships, your mindset. Because discipline is not a compartment, it's a way of living. And in the next chapter, you're going to take it even further. Because now it's time to refine, to sharpen, to elevate your standard to a level where average is no longer acceptable. Chapter 15, Raising Your Standard. There comes a point in your journey where doing just enough is no longer acceptable. Not because someone told you, but because you've changed. Your awareness is sharper, your discipline is stronger, your identity is clearer. And now you feel it, that quiet discomfort, when you operate below your potential, that inner voice that says, this isn't your level anymore. That's growth. That's the moment you stop chasing improvement and start demanding excellence from yourself. Now listen carefully. Raising your standard is not about doing more. It's about expecting more from what you already do. Because most people confuse effort with quality. They think working longer means working better. But discipline at this level is about precision, focus, intentional action. Now ask yourself this, are you doing things or are you doing them well? Because there's a difference. You can follow a routine, but still be distracted. You can complete tasks, but without full attention. You can stay consistent, but without intensity. And that's where growth slows down, not because you stopped, but because you settled. So now it's time to sharpen, not by adding more, but by elevating what you already do. Now, let's go deeper. There are levels to discipline. The first level is showing up. You build consistency. You follow through. You create structure. The second level is staying consistent. You avoid resets. You push through plateaus. You manage drift. But the third level is mastery. And mastery requires standards, higher standards, because at this level, you're not just asking, did I do it? You're asking, how well did I do it? Did you focus fully? Did you give your best effort? Did you stay present? Because discipline without presence becomes routine, and routine without awareness leads to stagnation. Now imagine this. You approach every task with intention, with focus, with full engagement. No distractions, no half effort, no autopilot. That's a different level. That's where results accelerate. Now here's something important. Raising your standard will feel uncomfortable because it exposes gaps. It shows you where you've been settling, where you've been doing enough instead of your best. But that discomfort is growth. It's awareness expanding. Now listen to this. You don't raise your standard all at once. You raise it gradually, one area at a time, one habit at a time, one action at a time, because consistency still matters. And if you raise everything at once, you risk breaking your system. So be intentional. Choose one area and elevate it. Maybe it's your focus. You eliminate distractions completely. Maybe it's your effort. You push slightly harder. Maybe it's your consistency. You remove even small lapses. Whatever it is, commit to it, because small upgrades create big shifts. Now let's talk about accountability, because higher standards require honesty. You need to see yourself clearly, not through excuses, but through truth. What are you avoiding? Where are you settling? What could you do better? Not to criticize yourself, but to improve. Because discipline is not about being harsh. It's about being honest. Nothing is stopping you anymore, not your past, not your habits, not your environment, because those things only have power when you give it to them, and now you don't. Now imagine your life moving forward. Every day, you show up, not perfectly, but consistently. You follow through. You stay aligned. You act, even when it's hard. And over time, your life changes, not in one moment, but in many small ones, stacked together, built through discipline. Now listen to this. You don't need motivation. You don't need inspiration. You don't need perfect conditions. You need action. And you've built that. Now here's something deeper. Being unstoppable doesn't mean you never feel doubt. It means doubt doesn't stop you. It doesn't control you. It doesn't decide your actions. You do. Now imagine this version of you. Clear, focused, consistent. You don't hesitate. You don't drift. You don't reset. You continue always. That's unstoppable. Now listen carefully. There will still be challenges. There will still be hard days. But the difference now is that you don't break. You adapt. You adjust. You keep moving, because that's who you are. Now here's the final truth. You don't become unstoppable by chance. You become unstoppable by choice. A choice you make every day, in every action, in every decision, in every moment. Now let me leave you with this. An unstoppable life is not built in intensity, it's built in consistency. And consistency is what you've built. Now, if this journey meant something to you, make it count. Don't just listen, apply. Don't just think, act. And if one part of this stayed with you, one idea that shifted your perspective, carry it with you, write it down, live it, because that's how change becomes real. Now here's your moment, your decision, your next step. What are you going to do today? Not tomorrow, not someday. Today, because this is where it starts. Not again. For real. And if you're committed, if you're ready to live this, make it yours. Silently, powerfully, completely. And if you choose to stay on this path, to keep building, to keep growing, then you're not just improving your life. You're becoming someone others will look at and realize what's possible. So take that step. Stay consistent, stay disciplined, and become unstoppable.